Hey team, welcome back to another episode of the Strength Game Podcast. I'm your host, Nick O'Brien, and this is episode number 114. The Strength Game is a weekly podcast dedicated to discussing all things physical culture with the coaches, athletes, iron enthusiasts, and experts deeply embedded in the strength game on both sides of the profession, both as coaches and as competitive athletes. I want to thank everyone who has liked, subscribed, shared, has left comments on the show. All your support allows us to continue to bring on expert guests and highlight more individuals in the strength game, just like our guest today. Also want to thank our sponsors. Family owned and operated since 1976, Samson Equipment has been specializing in full turnkey weight room buildouts from planning to installation. Based in Las Cruces, New Mexico, Samson provides professional weight room solutions for those looking to lead the way in advancing our strength and conditioning profession. Coaches have relied on Samson as their top resource for all their weight room renovations because they provide the finest materials and design, product customization, and the most reputable customer service in the business. If you're in the market for elite level strength equipment, weight room renovations, or upgrades, be sure to check out SamsonEquipment.com to see how Samson has been delivering clients a long-lasting yet affordable product for over 4 decades. Also want to thank our sponsor, Cerberus Strength. Since 2012, Cerberus is making the best strongman, powerlifting, and strength sports equipment and accessories, ensuring the ultimate competitive edge. Every one of their products is tried, tested, and proven by top-level athletes worldwide. If you're in the market for the highest quality strength conditioning gear and equipment, be sure to check out CerberusStrength.com and use promo code STRENGTH_game to save on your next order. I also want to thank our sponsor, Sport Kilt. Sport Kilt is the very first company to begin making casual kilts in the USA, founded in 1995. Taking the traditional kilt concept, they crafted a casual kilt using modern materials that is perfect for Highland athletes and casual kilt aficionados alike. So whether it's competing in Highland games, connecting with your heritage at a family gathering or wedding, or just casually spending some time around the house or wanting to stand out from a crowd, sport kilts are made for everyone and for every occasion. Make the ultimate Celtic statement by checking out the full selection of kilts and stylish kilt accessories at sportkilt.com, and be sure to use our promo code TSG to save at checkout. And in this week's episode, I am joined by Joe Sheffield. Joe is the head strength coach at Rolston Hockey Academy and Little Caesars AAA Hockey. With over 20 years of experience, personal training, and strength coaching, Sheffield has been in his current position since 2021. After getting injured playing college football, Joe changed his academic focus to exercise science and started working as an assistant at a physical therapy clinic. He started his strength coaching career at a private training facility, focusing on high-level, high school, college, and pro football players before expanding his business to nearly every major sport while completing his master's degree in exercise science at Oakland University, all while competing in competitive bodybuilding. He then spent 10 years in the corporate fitness world, working at several large chain fitness centers in various capacities while launching his own private consulting business, where he focuses on setting up gyms, sport training centers, and program design for his clientele. He also spent time in both pharmaceutical sales and later a consultant for weight loss and hormone treatment centers. Joe is also the co-author of The Ultimate Guide to Becoming a Strongman Champion and is currently working on 2 new books in addition to continuing his private consulting business. He has been featured on other podcasts such as the 1D Talks and Anabolic Bodybuilding podcasts as well. An athlete in his own right, Sheffield is a competitive strongman and former competitive bodybuilder, sponsored by First Attachment Nutrition. Joe has won many local and state level competitions in his career, most notably 4-time Motor City Strongest Man, 3-time Michigan Strongest Man, and has placed in the top 10 at Strongman National Championships 3 times. He continues to compete in local and regional strongman competitions, most recently getting second in the Masters heavyweight division at the Great Lakes Strongman competition. He's also trained in Highland Games, arm wrestling, stone lifting, and jiu-jitsu throughout his career. I'm excited to have him on the show today. So with all that said, let's get in the game with Coach Joe Sheffield. What's going on, everybody? Today we've got Coach Joe Sheffield on the show. How you doing today, Coach?
Doing good, Nick. Thanks for having me.
Hey, of course, like I said, we were talking a little bit before. Good buddy of mine, Andy Deck. I know you've competed with him a bunch of times. Kind
Yep.
of linked us up, and this is a cool thing to kind of bridge the gap between all the guys and talk a little bit of strongman, talk a little bit of old school training. And
Mhm.
you have a very unique kind of background in a
Mhm.
different position in the last couple years. So I'm
Yeah.
excited to get you on today.
All right. Yeah. Thanks for having
Hey,
me.
hey, so let's hop into it. Like, go back to like how everything started for you, like falling in love with training and lifting and everything. You've been involved in bodybuilding before you really switched gears and got into competing in strongman heavily. How did that all kind of come to fruition? Like, what sports did you kind of play growing up leading into your strongman career?
Well, for me, it's kind of all about football. I started playing football because my older brother did when I was in third grade, and I played other sports. I played baseball. Like as a young kid, I played sports year round, but football was the only thing I ever cared about. Okay, so luckily through my love of football, I learned to love training for football. Right, and so my plan A in life was to be a pro football player. Maybe plan A, B, and C. So I think a lot of strength athletes out there can relate to that. But unfortunately, by the time I got to college, I played high school, I played middle linebacker. I got a scholarship to a Division II school, Northwood University. But by my sophomore year, I was just we call it a stinger. So basically, every time I tackled somebody, my whole right arm would go numb, and I'd have to stand around for 30 seconds. And then it got to the point by my sophomore year where I could not touch anybody, even in a warm up drill, without getting a stinger. So and like it was really hard for me because football was my only love. Like I said, I went like I was playing football to continue to play football. That was the only reason. And so once I got hurt that bad, basically the doctor told me, he's like, you've got bulging discs in your neck. Like when I got an x-ray, the doctor said, how many car accidents have you been in? I go, none. But apparently that's how bad my neck looked at the time. So, I mean, it was a really hard decision for me, but I really loved lifting weights. So I'm like, okay. And, I played Division II. I played with guys that played in the NFL. I mean, there's a whole nother level there. I mean, I was good, but I was not, the kind of spectacular athlete that some of those guys were that I played with, or anybody that goes to the NFL. It's amazing the type of athletes and the size. And I'm barely 6 foot, so a lot of times get you unless you're 6'2". So I'm like, well, I've never missed a tackle because I was 2 inches too short, but that's just kind of the way recruiting grows. They figure they can teach a bigger guy how to play, and they can put weight on him, and they can do all that. So that kind of limited me. And then, like I said, once I kind of realized the writing on the wall, my football career was over. I said, okay, I want to get into lifting because that was my passion. I learned to love it. As a football player, you just understand at a young age that unless I lift weights and improve myself physically, I'm not going to be able to continue to play from level to level. And yeah, so started lifting weights in middle school and carried that through college. And then, like I said, once I got injured, I had to go on arm at the time. So luckily, a family friend of mine was a physical therapist. I started doing physical therapy, and then I started working at the clinic. And the therapists were always really good about showing me, "Hey, Joe, this is the injury is. This is how we rehabbed it." And so when I was playing college football, the school I was at was business only. So then once I left, then I changed my degree to exercise science after that. Originally, it was going to be physical therapy because that's kind of what I got into. It's like, wow, what a cool job. You get to work with people all day, sometimes athletes. And then when I went to Oakland University, that's when they had a master's degree in exercise science. I really focused in on that from there. But the physical therapy background still to this day kind of helps me with my career and plenty of my own injuries because I still compete. So every once in a while, I got to do some therapy on myself. But yeah, that was the real genesis of it. And then, like I said, once I was this was the important thing to discuss. This is kind of early internet days. So you couldn't just Google, like, I wanted to do powerlifting, I wanted to do strongman, but you couldn't just Google, I want to be a strongman, and then, have 5 gyms pop up like you can now. I mean, this is 2008, 2009, when I eventually got started. And so the first thing I got into was bodybuilding. So 2004, 2005, because bodybuilding was something I do on my own. You don't really need training partners. You don't, you can use dumbbells. You got to have a good training crew, right? And if you don't have good guys to train with, you're just not going to be able to make progress. So yeah, that went to bodybuilding first. I competed in that for 3 years, did 3 shows. I think my best showing was I got second at the Michigan Novice Championships. And then at the time, I was working at Lifetime, and there was a guy running around the gym holding an armload of 45-pound plates, and just running around the gym. So I was a trainer there, and I just, hey, man, what are you doing? He goes, I'm training for a strongman contest. I'm like, really? I didn't know that there was any around here. And luckily, my boss at the time was a guy named Joe Miller. He owns First Attachment Nutrition, who sponsors me now. We worked together at Lifetime, and he coached football with the guy that was running the show. Made a phone call for me and got me in the show. So I never touched any piece of strongman equipment, showed up to my first show, had no idea what to do. I mean, so I think I got 18th out of 22. I mean, literally the guy running the show, I had to ask him how to do stones. Like, he goes, well, what'd you do before this? I go, I was a bodybuilder. He's like, okay, you bend over, you do a chest fly, and then you roll the stone up into your lap, and then you try to do a power quick. And so that's kind of where I started. And then luckily at that first contest, I, ran into some guys, the Motor City crew, Steve Barkley, and used to be run by a guy named Jared Spybrook, who's one of the only people that turned pro as a lightweight and a heavyweight. And so they were training out in Warren at Jared's house, and I got invited to come out there and train. And then, let's see, 6 weeks later, I got 3rd place at my show. I was at the old Mount Pleasant show we used to do called King of the Mountain. And so I got 3rd place, qualified for nationals. And then 6 weeks later, I did my first show, or my first win of a show, let's put it that way. And then I went to nationals that year, and I got top 10. And so I was hooked. That was it for me. And that was probably 2009. And I've been doing strongman ever since.
That's awesome. That's a cool way to kind of get going, and going in the first competition blind and not even knowing what to do it. That's kind of crazy. Luckily, I had like Andy around, and I had other guys that like were kind of training out of the storage unit to kind of show me how to do things. And I was coming off an injury and like done playing at that point in time. So I was like, this is fun. And I was already in the weight room all the time. So it was just cool to be around all these like odd implements and get to carry stuff and get to do stones for like the first time. It took me a while because like my glute was still torn. I was like, oh, this is fun, but like you get to push yourself and like really want to accomplish something that just looks crazy, and you don't know what the weight is like really. So it's cool. It's also hard too, like, as you said it yourself, like having that training crew, especially in strongman, and like even a lot of these iron sports too. It's a big thing that like kind of makes or breaks a lot of people or keeps people in that community and stuff. And it's always been a weird subject for me, because ever since I left like Salisbury, like when I graduated and Andy was gone, and there was maybe like a year after he was gone, I'd been training by myself, like in the storage unit or in my garage or like at work. And
that's hard to do.
It's hard. Like sometimes you enjoy it. Like it's got some benefits to it, but you definitely miss, like, even if you're training for 2 separate competitions, just to have someone around as kind of like a coach, like a mentor or feedback, or just kind of like feed off each other's energy. Like that's huge. Like how are you kind of still, are you training with a crew? Is it been different through the years, or?
Yeah. So I've had, many different training crews over the years. But currently, and kind of, I had actually taken a few years, well, after COVID, I really didn't compete for a few years. And then a couple of my college football players that I've been training during the summer, a guy named Corbin Daly and my other guy, Will Kerr, they're both college football players. And so but they're super into strongman, and, we'll kind of get into strongman for athletes. That's going to be my next book coming out. So obviously I had a ton of good results with those guys, and they're super excited now that they're one of them's a senior, one of them's graduated. They really want to compete this summer. But an ideal training crew, as I've learned over the year, you need at least a couple really young guys. So those guys are both 21, 22, and they got a motor. They don't want to stop. You can't tear them out of the gym. And then I got another guy, Corey Vincent, who I used to work with in corporate fitness. He's 37, and just about 8 months ago, he decided I want to be a strongman all of a sudden, which I do not recommend. So I know I'm going to get blasted with a lot of older guys that want to do strongman because I'm 40. But you got to have a pretty good athletic background to do that. So if you have a good mix of the youth and the energy and older guys that know what to do, that to me is kind of your best training crew. Like last summer, I was getting ready to do Great Lakes Strongest Man, and I told those guys, I'm like, I'm going to do the programming for us, but you guys got to provide the motivation. So if I'm being lazy, if I'm trying to quit, I'm saying this right now when I'm not breathing heavy and stuff before the workout, I'm like, just do not let me quit no matter what. And those guys, they're football players. They're more than happy to be mean to me. So it's really helped me out. And that actually spurred me into getting back competing and competing well as, having a good group of guys around me.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably the big thing that kind of drives it because there's I mean, you inherently have to have like some intrinsic motivation to go in and train consistently and kind of make sure that you're doing all the things that are right outside of the gym and like outside of your training, because that's just a portion of it, as we know, like as coaches. But you're not going to have your best session every time you go in, and it's a lot harder when you're going in by yourself, like
Right.
to convince yourself. If it's You could talk your way out of a lot of things if you're by yourself.
Oh yeah, yeah. Like, oh, I need a recovery day, or sometimes you just walk in the gym and I look at the Atlas stones and my back starts to hurt. And it helps if you got somebody behind you, calling you names if you quit.
Oh yeah. Yeah, so like the big thing, I guess, going into that, like having that crew back around, obviously like COVID kind of hurt a lot of people's, maybe not their training necessarily, but kind of having a benchmark or a goal like set out for like a hard line competition to go to, just because places were shut down for so long. There was so much like instability and like uncertainty about when things were going to open or if a competition was going to be able to run. I did do one in COVID in California under like secret conditions,
Oh yeah, yeah.
but yeah, it was at Alan Thrall's gym, Untamed
Oh yeah,
Strength.
yeah.
And we were like, we kind of have clearance to do it in the middle of the parking lot. But someone got hurt and we had to call an ambulance, and they're like, well, we can't have the cops here. So can you put her in a car and like drive her down the road? And then we were all like hiding inside the gym, like kind of poking through the holes. I was like, is it safe to
Yeah.
come back outside? Or are we gonna get shut down? It was it was wild, but it was so refreshing to kind of be around everybody again and like just be in that atmosphere with people. And like I said, I'd been training by myself. There was no crew. So for me, like I was soaking it all in. I didn't care if I was dead last and I did not do well, but to just kind of be around those people again and be kind
Mhm.
of in that mindset where everybody's like trying to do their best and compete too. That's pretty cool. So kind of with that, like with that mindset, like what like does training and like competing like really mean to you? Because like you like you said, you took some time off and like for whatever reason it was on, maybe if it was more on top of COVID, but you're like getting geared up to like actually compete again. Like why? Like what's that itch? Like why get back into it like that?
Well, yeah. I mean, what happened was in 2019, I had so I was 35 at the time, and I retired from strongman, and then because I was going to go into Highland Games full time. Because I've done a few Highland Games. I really love that sport. As you get older, it's kind of like every strongman contest is like 600 pounds for reps, 800 pounds. Like so Highland Games is how far you can throw things. That's a lot easier on your body just in general. So I was kind of not that I had any injuries or anything, but I just wanted to change things up, to push a different kind of sport. But then COVID, we ran into that, and then I got invited to a show. Highland Games, but it's I don't know if Francis Brebner. He
Yeah.
puts on international Highland Games shows that are all might be 5 or 6 different stone lifts, and those are super cool. So he invited me out to do that. And I guess that would be the summer of 2020, but then that got canceled because of COVID, and then I just kind of got off track from there. And couple business things. I had a couple big consulting job going into that, and then another big one with a corporate fitness company. And yeah, time just got away from me. And then it was really the motivation of my young guys who were originally my clients. And then, once you can train with me and actually train, then you're not my client anymore. You get to be a training partner. So once those guys graduated to that, and they were super pumped to do their first show. And that's what got me back into it. The energy and this, and not to mention I don't have really any other hobbies. So I had to do something.
You could still mix some Highland games in there too, because that's kind of what happened to me too. I got to California and strongman competitions were either north of me or south of me, just kind of being stuck in the middle of the state, and they were so hard to come by. And like the same as you, like you've got something coming up for coaching, like a consulting, like an opportunity you can't really afford to miss, and it falls right on a competition day, and you've been getting ready for 10 weeks. It's the biggest kick in the nuts to be like, I can't go now. And like it doesn't matter like paying for it. I pay for so many competitions a year that I can't end up going to just because I want to save that spot.
Right.
And then something inevitably comes up. Like the last two Highland games I've had come up, and like they're good cancellations, like my beach volleyball team making it to NCAA's or
Okay.
like stuff like that. I'm like, I'm not going to this competition and missing this. There's no way. But it was so like that's what I fell in love with Highland games when I got out there and I got to do it all the time. And I try to sprinkle in a strongman game if I can actually like a competition, if I could find one and it fits. It's just so hard to like gear up for something and then get it pulled out from underneath you. And Highland games, it's like it's the same in 9 events. So I can go in blind and be okay. I can't go in blind to a car carry. And no, it's not
Yeah.
gonna go well.
Yeah, actually, we used to have a federation called NAHA, which North American Highlander Association, and they would do half strongman, half Highland game shows. Everybody loved those, but if anybody out there wants to, start that organization up or something similar, please do it.
Yeah,
Just,
those are fun. There's some of
yeah.
the I've seen some of those Highlander games and they're cool because they have like usually like a stone carry, a natural stone, like clean and press, weight over barb. Sometimes they put caber in. It's kind of a cool blend of the two.
Mm.
And it gives kind of people, I think it's like the perfect chance for Highland athletes to like kind of see what strongman is with like manageable things. And
Yeah.
then it gives strongman a taste of, hey, well, this is the technical side of doing some of these throws that like you might be super strong, but like here you got to do some footwork and you got to work on your timing. So it's like the perfect blend. Or for me, it's like, oh, this is perfect. I'm okay at both of these things. This is fun.
Yeah, and it's less, doing a weight for height is a lot less on your body than doing, 500 pounds for max reps in 60 seconds, like a
Oh yeah.
regular show. So yeah, you don't get the kind of the wear and tear on your body the same way too.
I know it's perfect. Hey, so you talked about it too. It's pretty cool with strongman. For those that kind of don't know, and some other strength sports as well too. It's almost like an invitation only, and it's like one of the cool clubs that you want to be in. But I don't think people are like necessarily gatekeepers, but they want to like really kind of manage who comes in to their community. Like
Mhm.
for yourself, like we could talk about kind of strongman and like how that's happened, like where you're kind of selective with your training partners because it's important to you. It's like your favorite hobby. It's like something that you love to do day in and day out. How is maybe the selection process for that, or like what constitutes a really good training partner? And then do some of those like characteristics come into play when you're working with like some of your athletes, like when you're talking about like kind of keeping the culture?
Yeah, I mean, so when I first started, like the first day I went to Motor City Strongman Club, and like I told you, the guy that ran it, he's a heavy pro lightweight and a pro heavyweight, and he was a cop too in Warren, Michigan, which is a pretty scary area. So he's a scary dude. The first thing he says to me, he points at me, he goes, "Hey, bodybuilder guy, I'm not going to learn your name for 6 months because you're probably going to quit." So it was a pre-internet. Things were a little rougher. Okay, nobody was looking for entry fees or trying to sell you anything. So you really kind of had to prove yourself, and that was one of my proud moments when I finally got accepted in the club. But yeah, to your point, like the gym that I lift at most of the time. out here is called RPG, Rochester Performance Gym. And, you walk in there, there's heavy metal, there's guys, squatting on a monolift, everybody, there's, energy in there. That's the type of place to train. And so, like, to my teams, like I tell my teams, like I don't care what sport you are, I can see a championship team in the weight room and I can see a team that's not a championship team. Are you guys celebrating? Are you guys high-fiving? You having a good time? You actually enjoying it? So the same thing kind of goes into team training as to with your strongman club. Like, it's like, I remember when I used to, my old school, when we first started, the worst thing you could ever do was we used to train on Sundays. If you skipped a Sunday and then you showed up the next Sunday, you better have a real good excuse because 10 guys were going to just rip you apart, so there was accountability. Like, oh yeah, you're at a baby shower. That's cute. Like, there was nothing that was acceptable to that. And so just that, dedication, no matter, even when I was younger, if I was out late, I'd still, set my alarm, wake up at 8 o'clock, be to the strongman club at 9, and there'd be a barbell with 100-pound plate on each side. And then the way that we did things is everything we did was rotation. So it doesn't matter if it's -20, you 245 on that barbell, start warming up, and then we just go around and you don't miss your spot in your rotation. And it was a little bit brutal, but man, we all got strong. And then, my training sessions ended up being harder than my contests. So I go to a contest, like, man, I feel great, because I pushed myself so hard. We're doing 4 sets of everything. The contest, at least you're only going to do 1. So yeah, I learned a lot about championship mentality and, and then, about training crews. As that crew kind of got older, then it's like, hey, let's skip that event, or let's only do 3 sets instead of 4. And then I'm like, okay. And then I noticed my own placings were slipping a little bit. I'm like, okay, I got to get some new training partners in here, some new blood, because, as much as I love this stuff, I need to get pushed sometimes too. I mean, getting under, a heavy barbell is not a natural thing to do. So it's like if you got somebody yelling at you, it's a little bit easier to get under there when you got some adrenaline going.
Yeah, you're right. It's like I tell my athletes that all the time, like being a high level athlete necessarily isn't easy, and it's also not healthy. And
Yeah.
it's not natural to kind of go in and do those things. Like your body wants to do what's easiest, and your mind is going to play tricks on you to kind of put you in a position where you're like, you know what, maybe I shouldn't do it. It's that internal voice a lot of times gets drowned out when you've got great training partners that are there and they're kind of ribbing you all the time, and they're the ones that'll tell you the honest truth, or they'll like you said, they'll hold you accountable to what you said before you were kind of wheezing and bent over and tired. And I don't want to listen to my voice when I'm dead tired. I want someone to make sure that they're kind of reminding me of what I said before I just did that set.
Yeah, I mean, there was times last summer I thought I was in actual danger because of what they were making me do. But it all paid off. I ended up getting second place at Great Lakes Strongest Man in the heavyweight masters division, which was my first contest really in about 5 years. So I was super happy, and it really has all to do with my training crew. Definitely couldn't have done it that well without them. That's for sure. So
That's
that's
awesome.
how important that is.
Yeah, that's great. That's cool. Kind of congrats on that. It's nice to kind of come back and hey, see, I still got it and I can put in the work and everything too. I think that's a great part about training too, is like if you're with a good group, you're making training so much harder that competition is not only like easier, but like it becomes so much more fun. And
Fun.
you could see that with the athletes that are on the field or like whatever their sport is, or strongman or Highland games, like when it's just kind of that flow state and they're just kind of they might be have emotionally different or interact differently, but you can tell like when they're relying back on their training and they're not like getting worked up with a mistake that happens or like a bad result, a bad throw, a bad placing, because they trust in the process and they trust in everything they did to prepare for it. And if you did those things right, like the chips fall where they do and the results are going to already kind of be predetermined. So that's a great way to do it. And I guess that can kind of shift over towards like your coaching career and everything too. Because
Yes. Yeah.
you've been in so many different avenues. So I'd ask this first before we kind of get going. With everybody that you've worked with, would you constitute everybody an athlete? Because you work with a lot of hockey players now, kind of at Rolston Hockey
Mhm.
Academy, and then with the Little Caesars AAA team.
Mhm.
Um, you've worked corporate, you've worked in the private setting and everything. Like to you, was everybody an athlete at some point in time, or did it like stuff shift throughout your career as you started working with different clientele?
Yeah, I think that's something, we all fall into, is that, because originally I only trained football players, because basically once I learned how to train properly, it was really like Charles Poliquin stuff. And then later on West Side Barbell. And so once I learned how to train myself, the first thing I wanted to do was like help my friends, especially my football teammates. It's like, okay, let's get strong. Let's win a championship, that kind of thing. And so that's how I started, was just with the guys around me. And then I got my ACE personal training certification while I was doing my undergrad at Oakland University. And then there was a local gym, and they had a sports training center up front, and nobody was using it. And so I just walked in there and said, "Hey, can I train athletes here?" And they said, "Yeah, great." And it was a small little facility. It was called the Lions Den. And that's where I started bringing all my athletes kind of from my hometown. And then it kind of spread out to other people hearing about me. And then, basically I would be in a kind of front fishbowl thing. And then members would walk in and said, "Hey, I've got a kid that does, and that's where I got into football, because that's what I love. But the problem for you young coaches out there is, if you're in one sport, there's seasonality, right? So like, okay, during football season, I'm not bringing in any money. Okay. So your choice is train regular people or train different sports. And so what had happened is, I'd get a football player, and then their parents would come to me and say, "Oh, his sister Susie plays volleyball. Can you train her?" "Sure." "Okay." And then it just kind of built up from there. So I went from football only to multi-sport, because remember, rent's always due on the first of the month. Okay. So I don't like to tell, especially then, I didn't tell anybody no. "Equestrian? What do you do?" "Okay, we'll figure it out." "Okay, I'll do some research," whatever you got. And so that started me on the training path. But then once I moved into corporate fitness, because I was doing my master's degree and I had to pay for it. So I went to, Lifetime, which is a bigger company, a lot more money. But then you're all of a sudden you're training lawyers and CEOs and business people, and some of them do triathletes and stuff like that. But the first thing you got to learn as a trainer is that what works for you is not necessarily going to work for all your clientele. And especially if you're very hyper focused, then you get outside of that and you're like, "Oh, how come this isn't working for this person?" And so that's where I really relied on my physical therapy background, because that's really what you're doing with most people when they are an adult coming into a fitness setting, looking for training. Um, and so, yeah, that was a very different change of pace for me. But even in the corporate fitness world, and this is what I'll tell the young coaches, like, I was always the strength guy. So if anybody had a sport goal or something, then it got referred to me. Or, somebody, people pay for their kids to get training, Lifetime even back in the day, it's $100 an hour. So it wasn't cheap. So you're very limited to your clientele. But, I still got the athletes. That's actually how I got into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because the Oakland University Jiu-Jitsu coach showed up and said, "Hey, I want a trainer." And I said, "Joe's the strength guy, so go to him." So then that got me involved in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And yeah, and so that's how I paid for my master's degree, was working on a little bit older people. But, I still had some athletes on the side and all that. And then kind of how it happened, how I got into the pharmaceutical world is kind of funny. So a guy I went to college with ended up starting a weight loss hormone replacement therapy company, and just got in contact with me and said, "Hey, Joe, do you know anybody you can refer to me?" And I was at Lifetime, so all my clients are older. All of them have some kind of issues. They're on medications. They're trying to lose weight. And so I started referring clients over to this company, and they'd give me a kickback. So little note to you young trainers out there, that was a good way for me to make a little side money. And what had happened is I referred so many people over that they offered me a job to do it full time. So I went over from training full time to going over to pharmaceutical sales full time. And that was a bit of a strange transfer. And I remember sitting at a desk and with a shirt and a tie on. I'm like, "How did I get here?" This was kind of a trip from being, wanting to train pro football players all the time. And so, yeah, that morphed into the pharmaceutical sales. And all that time I was doing strongman, and, I was training on people online for strongman. Really, I was just hyper strength sports during, at night, and then pharmaceuticals during the day. And then after that, what had happened is I got a lot of consulting offers. So consulting offers to help set up gyms, consulting offers to set up other weight loss and hormone therapy companies. Like I said, you at a network, every once in a while a doctor comes to you and says, "Hey, I want to start up a side gig." Or a lot of emergency room doctors, by the time they get 55, they don't really like being in the emergency room anymore. So a lot of them will go into like a hormone replacement therapy, weight loss type business on the side to kind of de-stress their life a little bit. So I kind of got into that, setting up those my girlfriend is currently doing a project where she's doing IV therapy and weight loss for an urgent care that's got 13 locations. So I'm consulting with that right now. So that's always something that kind of pops up as it goes. And then I guess the hockey thing, the way I got into that was actually I was just looking online, on Indeed. I was keeping an eye out there, and they were looking for a hockey strength coach that knew the Charles Poliquin system. And I said, "Wow, that's me to a T." So I applied for it, and then Brian Rolston, who I work for now, he has his own hockey academy, and he's also the president of Little Caesars Hockey. So he actually trained with Charles Poliquin when he was in the NHL. And so he's a Poliquin guy, through and through. So he wouldn't work with a coach unless they were a Poliquin guy. So I trained both his kids that way. I trained all of our students roughly that way at the school. And, that's basically the Poliquin principles, in full range of motion, big lifts, actually getting stronger, pretty basic concepts. But yeah, that was my lead into that, was just Charles Poliquin stuff. When I was a football player, that was the first time I actually found programming that worked. If you remember the old Iron Man magazine, they used to have a 2-page thing called Questions of Strength every month. And so I would run to the, for you kids out there, there used to be these things called magazines. So I would run to the store every month, grab that thing, find the Charles 2 pages of whatever. And then I obviously got into, he had some stuff online, and then his books and his training programs. So Charles was really the basis of my strength training that actually worked. And so that's funny that's come around full circle to now that's kind of what I'm doing today.
Yeah, that definitely came full circle, and that's a wild ride to like see all the different kind of places that you've been, because you've been in so many different demographics. And at the end of the day, it's all still like encompassing health and fitness and strength.
Mhm.
But there's so many different like kind of like fingers and like limbs that kind of go out that people could pursue. And I know we kind of talked about it a little bit before we got going. It's like, I think a lot of coaches end up getting into whatever the thing they know. And when
Mhm.
they're young in it, and I think that was me too. Like I'd worked as like a fitness floor person or whatever, kind of helping the guys that were personal trainers, like at a local fitness club, like when I was finishing my senior year of high school, and I would come back in the summer and do it. And I thought I wanted to be a personal trainer, and I did like my ACE certification too. And then I watched them and I was like, no, no, this is not what I want to do at all. And when I finally went to college, I realized like, oh, you can do this at a collegiate level.
Mhm.
And I got out of my athletic training track and I went right to strength conditioning. And I was like kind of hooked at that point and just kept doing internship and internship. And they were only in collegiate because I knew what I wanted to do. But I also didn't really know that there were all these other ways that you could kind of go about doing the same thing. I was just hard set on, I want to work with athletes doing strength at the collegiate level. So I'll pursue that. But there's, like you kind of mentioned, you can still work strength and work with like CEOs, and you can work with musicians, you can work with high level like industries, you can work some of these corporate wellness places. I know there's a bunch of Exos and other places that have them built in, and they actually pay their employees to go train at some of these places. So for any young coach, there's so many ways you could take it. You don't have to be in athletics. You don't have to be in some of these other positions, because they're starting to pop up everywhere. They're high school, there's these
Yeah.
academies, there's everything. So like from your kind of point of view, like since you've been in all these different ones, I'm there's no doubt in my mind that they've kind of every place you've gone, you've been able to rely on something that you've taken from the places previous. But is there anything that like to get to the place you're at that you might have done differently, or you thought of like was like a big kind of life-changing moment that would would have benefited you in any one of those kind of five areas you've been at that's like maybe transferable across all five?
Yeah, well, I mean, first off, I would have loved, when I was a young guy, I would have loved to go the university route, but there was nothing around. Oakland University, where I went, they had one strength coach for everything. Okay, poor guy. And then, out where I live, there were, there's Ann Arbor is an hour away, Michigan State. Like there was just no opportunity. And a lot of times to get into those internships, you got to come up through the program. You got to know somebody, either went to the school, the professor, things like that. So the university route was never kind of open to me, or there was nothing easy. And like it's hard, it was tough for me. You got to go move somewhere. The internships don't pay. I'm like, okay, how am I going to pay my rent? What am I going to do? Pick up a side job on the outside? And so, just for a lot of reasons, opportunity, and just in my own mind, I was like, okay, I got to figure out how to make some money out of this. Okay, I paid for my own education out of my pocket, and by the time I was done, I remember when I did my master's dissertation with my professors, they said, Joe, we really think that you should go and get your doctorate. I go, but guys, I can't go another 7 years being poor. Okay. But like, I gotta work, but luckily, as I was going through school, my undergrad and grad, that's when I was running my own training facility, and I was actually training athletes outside of that. So I had a much deeper knowledge than all my classmates who were just, reading the book and doing things theoretically. So I knew that I could already make money out on the outside. So I'm like, all right, let's just get school out of the way. And I feel I had enough business confidence that I could at least go somewhere from there. But yeah, I mean, everything that I've done has been health and fitness related. There's different corners of that business. Do you like this? Some people like working with older clientele, CEOs and doctors and stuff like that. I've done everything, but I like to be with the younger athletes. Number one, as a coach, they're the most adaptable, they make the most progress, and you kind of make the biggest difference in their life. Like helping people after 25, they're already kind of set as a person. Young kids are still developing. You never know. You might have the laziest kid ever one year, and then the next year he turns into a monster, right? And so that's the part, for me. And I don't know if I mentioned this. You see Uncle Joe's gym back here. You got all my background is my nephews. I got four of them that are 12 through 18. So that was like, as they got older and they actually got interested in this stuff, that's where I'm like, youth athletes and athletes in general, that's my passion. If I can do anything out of all this stuff, there was fun and educational, all the different things I've done. But, as a coach, working with youth athletes and athletes that, have hopes and dreams, that's the most enjoyable thing that I can do. And, also helps you sleep at night because, you're actually, doing something more than getting a paycheck. You're actually helping kids move forward, not just in sports, but in life. The lessons you learn, like I've watched my nephews, how much more confident they get as they get stronger, and it changes their personality, makes them more outgoing. It does so much for kids. Obviously as adults, we love it and it benefits us, but I think it's even more important for younger kids to get into weight training and get in correctly. And just the fact that I can be the person to facilitate that, not only with other kids, but, the fact that I've been able to do it with my own nephews is just, that's, worth any amount of money to me right now. So, there's different points we get as coaching. There was times where I was all financially focused, and now luckily at this time I can kind of step back. I can do projects on the outside, but 80% of my time is spent helping kids. And that's really, like I said, for anybody out there, look at the different avenues. Young coaches, at least get your social media going, get some online training clients going. At least anybody can do that. Like there's a lot of university guys or high school coaches and stuff that kind of do that on the side, and that's a way to supplement their income that wasn't really available 20 years ago, or at least nobody really thought of it. But yeah, that's kind of what I gathered going through the whole gamut of the industry. Like I have is eventually I did this because I was a young kid and all I wanted to do was get stronger and be a pro athlete. So now that I can be in a place where that's the type of people I'm working with 80% of the time, that's kind of the top of, I feel that I have achieved, what I wanted to kind of in this field at this point.
Yeah, I think a lot of coaches end up finding exactly like where they're super passionate about and where they want to be, because you end up being the coach that you really wanted to, like, that really impacted you in a way, or you want to become the coach that like that you didn't have.
Yes.
And sometimes it's a mix of both, or it's like, I mean, a lot of the coaches I end up talking to, like it's not mutually exclusive to say like, hey, you have to be like you have to have gotten injured and not reached your full potential in your own mindset to like be a successful coach, or you can't be a talented person to be a coach. But it does, there are a lot of arguments to say that like many of some of the really good coaches, like stuff didn't come easy to them, and or your career was cut short, or you had some injuries and you had to kind of fight and tooth, claw, and nail, like get to the point in time where like you have to figure this stuff out, and you have to like make sure that you're doing your due diligence to put now your athletes in a good position, because you don't want them to kind of go through the troubles that you did.
Yeah.
And some of it you can't prepare them all for, and you're not going to be able to kind of coddle them and like protect them from every single injury, but you could put them in the best possible position. And youth athletes are a huge portion of that, because you're at such a critical point in their development and the time, like you said, like education, the fun side of it, character development, like there's
Mhm.
so many things that you could impact in a short amount of time. Like kind of on that note, like what is kind of like the age range that you kind of work with like the hockey academy, and like
Yeah.
how do you kind of progress them like throughout that career?
Yeah, that's actually something I think we had talked about that a little early. Something I'm super passionate about, and I spent a lot of time studying when I was doing my master's degree was the Soviet Olympic system. Okay, and what they could do because they had complete control of everybody's life. So I always get parents coming to me and say, "Hey, this is 8-year-old Johnny. He's going to be a pro NHL player. What should we do? Like, what's the track or whatever it is?" And really, what I emphasize hockey's a little bit different because it is so unnatural. Okay. It's just not a natural thing to be skating around on skates with a stick. So it takes, just like they say, 10,000 hours of practice. And that's why, Michigan, Midwest is a big hotbed of hockey because kids in other states just can't get enough ice time, number one. And then they don't have the high level of competition. So, like, we had a kid at our school that moved up from Houston. There's only 4 sheets of ice in Houston. Okay, so how are you gonna, so so those kids, we have several from Texas actually moved up here for that. But so you go from doing 4 hours on the ice a week to doing some of our kids do 40 hours between our school and between their practices and between their games. All right, you're not gonna beat that kid. Okay, if you're getting 4 hours on the ice and somebody else is getting 40, you're just not gonna be able to compete. Okay, and so when it comes to I like I said, I studied the Soviet system, so I'm a little bit against early specialization because, unfortunately in this country, we get the stories of Tiger Woods, Venus and Serena Williams, who started their one sport at 2 years old and did nothing else all the way through. And so a lot of parents still think that that is the avenue to success. When, like the Soviets found out, is that it's better to be a multi sport athlete and then specialize later, right? And because this gets into just neurological development in general. So, remember, pre-puberty, kids' brains are much more plastic, much more adaptable than they are post-puberty. So if I get a kid that learns karate before puberty, he's always going to be better than the kid that learns after. Okay. It's just like the same thing with learning a language. If you grow up speaking 2 or 3 languages, you will think in those language fluently. But if you learn those languages post puberty, you're going to think in your base language first and then translate it in your head. And then so you're always going to be a few milliseconds slower on that. So the skills that you want to develop, you got to focus on those pre puberty. Now, like when that window closes, if you only do one sport, you're going to you're missing out on a big amount of development. So a lot of times we'll get a kid, like I said, we'll get kids as young as 8 years old. And then where luckily with our program, you're having a weight training program to balance it out, because the problem when you're doing any sport, especially hockey, is you're doing certain movements thousands and thousands of times, but you're not doing so many other movements. And so my job at the academy is to balance that out. Okay. And so if the kids aren't playing another sport because the demands of hockey, especially when you get to AAA, you've got to play, from September to April, so it's a long season. And then, I very much encourage the kids to do other things. I mean, even these days, if they'll just go swimming and climb a tree, that would be enough for me. But unfortunately, that stuff we grew up with is just, that's not the way kids are. Everything's structured for them today. And so what I tell parents is to take advantage of the hyper adaptability phase, right? And so that's from up until puberty. And so what I would like to do, if you ideally, I'd have a kid start out with gymnastics and then, wrestling, and then, basketball, soccer, coordination sports. Because what the Russians used to do is they would divide the year into quarters, and you would do a different sport every quarter. And then around 15, 16, that's when you would specialize into your one sport. And now the thing is, they could do anything they want. So they did it both ways. They hyper specialized kids early, and they did it late. And the kids that did it late always ended up having a better career, less injuries than the kids that were specialized early. Right. And so, like I said, so my job most of the time is to balance out the things that are happening on the ice. These kids are, they're super quad dominant. They got bad posture. Their shoulders are coming forward. One's higher than the other because they're holding their hockey stick. So that's really what I do on a day-to-day basis, at RHA, is try to balance out all those things that are going on the ice. Now, with that, a kid, my young kids, once they hit 12, 13, 14 years old, they can put on 20 pounds during a hockey season. But I still have to be consistent. I got to dance around games. I got to make sure they're recovered so they can still, have a decent level of play. But at that age, they're hyper adaptable. So I always tell them, the more you train, the less sore you're going to get and the stronger you're going to get. Like I still use with my younger guys, a variation of the 1x20 program. Like I've got kids this year, their max bench press in September was 115, and now they're doing 15, 16 reps with it. Okay, so kids can make massive progress during the season. You just have to be smart about it and, interchange it, but still understanding nobody really cares if you win a hockey game as a 13-year-old. Okay, nobody cares who the 13-year-old champions are for more than a day. Okay, so we need to take a longer term look at this because some kids want to, I got a game, I need a week off of lifting weights. Like, no, you don't. Okay, we can easily kind of microdose that and keep you making progress throughout the whole year. I got another kid, he put 100 pounds on his trap bar deadlift this year, during hockey season, where, if you don't watch the kids and they don't weight train, usually during a hockey season, each kid will lose about 10 pounds. So like with my boys teams, my first year I had a team, they lost 200 pounds as a team. Okay. And I'm like, guys, so now I'm very careful, I got 20 guys losing 10 pounds, that's going to affect you over the course of the season. You're going to be weak, you're going to be slow. So, whenever they have tournaments, the first thing I always do is weigh them in. Hey buddy, you just lost 4 pounds this weekend. Let's regain some of that water weight and eat something before we start training hard again. But yeah, that's really the thing in hockey is, okay, because of the bands of the sport, and once you get to travel A, you have to play a certain season. So out in season, you need to be doing a weight training program to settle out any imbalances that are developing. And then in the summer, I would hope, A, you lift some weights, but B, I would hope you do regular physical activity, because being on the ice is such an unnatural thing, because people ask me about barefoot training. I'm like, no, my hockey players in shoes on the ground, that's barefoot training for them because their ankles have been locked up in hockey skates for 9 months. Okay. So yeah.
That's a good point with that too, because they're already in an unnatural position. Like you have to meet them where they're at. So you can't really just go from ice. You're on the ice in these tight boots, and you're going from your skates just to normal tennis shoes, for training, to go all the way to barefoot. That's such a huge spectrum. I never really thought about it. But then you see guys, I've seen guys warming up. Maybe it's just their low shoes. Some of the guys that are warming up when they're playing, they're juggling soccer balls before. I guess most of them have shoes on, but I didn't think about that before, where that's such a difference between what they're wearing already.
Because what happens is then a lot of hockey players love lacrosse, but they go directly from 9 months of hockey to lacrosse. And I can guarantee you, we're going to have a high ankle sprain. Okay. It's just, you're going from ice and hockey boots to turf. There's always going to be a problem. Okay. So my kids that are going to do that, I try to explain to them, okay, here's what you need to prepare for. They need to be doing lots of full range of motion calf raises to stretch out that connective tissue. They need to be doing plyos before they get out there and try to go, run around on turf, which they haven't done for 9 months. So yeah, that's another issue is, preparatory. So once again, I love other sports, but we got to be careful because the demands of hockey, they cause issues. They need to be watched. And I'll tell this to any young strength coach out there. If you're like me, maybe you're in the football world and you're interested in the hockey world, the best piece of advice I ever got was just train your hockey players like running backs. You basically have 20 running backs, 20 tailbacks. The kids need to be strong. They need to be strong legs, impact proof shoulders. As I was explaining to my kids, half my kids, by the time they get to play juniors hockey, they've already had a shoulder surgery. and I would tell them, yeah, a few straps of bacon is the only thing holding your shoulder together. The human shoulder was not meant to go into the boards at 20 miles an hour and then get slammed by another dude. That's just not the human body was not intended for that. So, I'm super big on, shoulder care, rotator cuff strength, stuff like that. But yeah, hockey is a very different world, and coming from football, there was a few things that, what is this? But, that's just the finances of the world and just the way it works in the hockey. These hockey rinks got to stay in business. So they're always trying to, do some kind of tournament or something like that. And it's just, those are the demands that you are forced into as a hockey player. So you just have to adapt to that. Or preferably you have a coach that can help you adapt to that.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Like the transition phases and like even like before we talk about that, like how hockey players usually check. It's completely different than how football is. And like even lacrosse sometimes just because it's you can't square up a hit like that on the ice because you're moving so fast at different angles. And the only time you can really kind of time most of it, unless you get like a clean open ice hit, is when like the puck's on the boards and like there's some plays on the boards and then you kind of know it's coming, so you're bracing for the impact. But it is a lot of like shoulder, like side, like checks versus football where the field is kind of shrunk based off where the players are having like there's not a unless it's an open hit the same way like
Mhm.
you're probably grabbing ankles or like getting someone at the hips at that point. It's not really, I mean, it's a tackle on the stats, but it's not like a like brutal tackle or like check that you're getting good at hockey or lacrosse.
Mhm.
Hey, so touching on like the transition stuff, because that's an important concept. Like you work at like the hockey academy. So like, and you're talking about like early specialization and having some of those kids go out, hey, go do something else in this time. I don't know, you could correct me if I'm wrong, like if some of the training with them kind of if it's out of hockey season or if they have access to you, if it kind of falls out of your scope when they're not playing. But if they're going to play another sport and we're talking about, oh, well, they're going to go play lacrosse in the off season,
Mhm.
you got to be cognizant of all these things. Like it's different change of direction, different equipment, different gear, different surface. Like, are you working with those players a little bit kind of on like almost a transition phase? Because
Yeah.
that seems like something that like I don't work with it as much anymore. I think in my career in college, I've had three players, maybe three or four that were two sport athletes in college. And two of them don't count in my world because they were pitchers and kickers. They were football kickers
Oh,
and
okay.
pitchers. So I was like, there's no big difference. Like you're gonna use your foot, you're gonna use your hand, like your arm. Like I can't really mess it up. And then I had a football player and wrestler, and that one was a wild one just because like you go right, your football season ends and you're already halfway through the wrestling season. So whatever weight you're at is where you're
Yeah.
at. So that was a hard one, but like you're talking about like younger athletes, and we said like, hey, no one cares like if you're winning a 13-year-old game, like you're if you're at an academy at that level and you're talking to parents and you're talking to kids, like they have aspirations and dreams of playing higher and higher. So you kind of have to put that stuff in perspective. But in terms of their development, like on and off the ice and just total like athletic development, you want to be well rounded in those early years. So how do you kind of work on a transition phase, or maybe if you don't work with them, kind of educate them on like, hey, you should do a couple of these things to kind of get you out of hockey mode and kind of prepare you for basketball, lacrosse, swimming, whatever you're gonna kind of do until you come back.
Yeah, so luckily, like at RHA, I've got the kids all year for 4 hours a week. So each kid has, a 1 hour allotment of time. So I've got all the time in the world to individualize every program to every kid. Not that there's, kids, not that much variation, but yeah, so I have enough time because that's a problem, when you're a strength and conditioning coach, especially, when I was working in the private sector and stuff like that, is yeah, okay, I got a 10-year-old and, I could do something with him, but he's only coming one time a week. Okay. It's just, especially the younger they are, the more frequency and the more volume they need. Because that was, going back to my original days is like when I was getting, because that's unfortunately in the training business, like all I wanted to do was train pro and college football players. But, as we talked about the seasonality of it, it just doesn't happen. It's just too hard because you're going to go so much of the year without getting paid. then the kids and the parents that are most likely to sign up their kids are the younger parents. 8 to 12-year-old parents are more likely to sign their kid up for a training program than, let's say, a 16 to 18-year-old. And so what I had to do to survive was learn how to deal with that. And so those kids, uh, they need the frequency and they need the volume. So if they're getting that, I can get them in great shape. And I got 9 months with them, 4 hours a week. That's a very rare thing in the training world. To get a kid 3 times a week is pretty rare. So luckily for me, the way we have set up is I can do anything and everything. I can do all the mobility stuff. I can do work on as an individual and just make sure every kid is perfectly tuned up to know, okay, Johnny's going to play lacrosse. All right, we got to do X, Y, and Z at least 6 weeks out to make sure that he doesn't get hurt. Okay. And so that's just a good part about my position. But yeah, it's a hard thing. And let's say if I was a coach and I was only seeing that kid 1 day a week, Johnny might be getting injured this year, And so they really have to put in the time because, like I said, they're putting in so many hours and so much repetition into the hockey related things that aren't going to carry over to, let's say, lacrosse necessarily, or track or whatever other sport they're going to do. So that's really the biggest thing is, handling each kid as an individual. These kids are going through growth spurts. I got kids that'll grow 4 inches in a year. I've had that happen this year. It's like, hey, coach, my bench press isn't going up. I'm like, yeah, because your arms are 4 inches longer than they were 4 months ago. Okay. You're actually lifting more weight. Okay. You're lifting it farther. And so yeah, that's the thing is like, if a kid is going to do that, like I have even one of my U14 girls that she plays travel softball at the same time she does travel hockey. Okay, so that's just a massive amount of load on that athlete. So I got to talk to her every day and say, okay, what do you have going on this week? And I have to be really careful not to overload them because they are doing so much. But yeah, that's basically the format. Is it really depends on the athlete and then how much time do you have to work with them, because those are the kind of the biggest issues in our business. Is like I can get great results 4 days a week, but if I only got a kid 2 days a week, results may vary a little bit, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, that's a far cry from what I've heard from other people that are working like sports performance, like private facilities or working with youth athletes, where as soon as they kind of get to their competitive season, whatever their sport is, and like unfortunately, when you get to some of those areas, like you're kind of in a hotbed for whether it be hockey, like up in the Northeast, or um, like like back in Maryland, like lacrosse is huge. So when you're in that area too, um, like kids are already specializing. And as soon as they get to season, they're playing so many more games than they are even practicing, and lifting and training is already like thrown out the window because practice is more important than that, and games are more important than practice. And then it just kind of trickles down. But it's cool to see that like you're allotted this amount of time, you're already training with them, you're having conversations with them to make sure that what they're doing in the weight room with you is still benefiting them on the field, but you're still kind of pushing through at the same point and making sure that when they go on the ice, like they're still prepared. Like it's, I know these questions probably come to you all the time because like you're working with the youth athletes and you probably like talk to the parents and stuff about this. Maybe
Mhm.
not this in depth with training, but it always fascinates me because I work with kind of 10 plus years from that point in time when they've already picked one sport
Mhm.
and they're in college, and like you're kind of making them better, you're putting some of the tweaks on it. But when you're talking about like overloading them, like and they're going through growth spurt changes, puberty, like all these things, like maybe they don't want to play the sport anymore or something crazy like that. Like how do you know like how to push them, and how do you know when too much is too much? Because like I can kind of sit down with some of my like more mature, like maybe my juniors and seniors and some of the older players, and maybe even some of like the freshman stuff coming in that have a good training age and background, and be like, hey, what have you done in the past? What did you like? What did you not like? Like what gets you ready, like mentally, physically? Like what is too much? How do I push you? It feels like most youth athletes don't really know that just because they haven't been exposed to it long enough. And they don't even, some of them are like, I don't know, like what, if this is supposed to hurt, if this
Yeah.
is a good thing, like they can kind of run through brick walls. So like, how do you know when to stop them?
Well, basically, the main thing I do, and luckily, like once again, because of the setup of my school, I've got the time to talk to every kid every day. and say, okay, Johnny, what's going on this week? How do you feel? You got games, you got practices. These kids have team workouts that I'm not in charge of because a lot of kids at the school are on different teams. So who knows? They could be doing walking lunges up and down a hallway for an hour straight the day before. So I got to talk to them because I got to see what's going on. Now, they are kids, so they can't lie to me. I've had, a lot of magically never healing leg injuries that prevent leg day come up. Okay, I'm like, okay, but you can play high level hockey, but you can't use your legs in the weight room? That doesn't make sense. So you got to take it with a grain of salt because the kids, some kids are lazy, but other kids, they want to do too much. So then you got to draw them back. So every kid has their own notebook and tracks all their weights and stuff like that. So for example, I see a kid and their lifts are stalling out. I'm like, okay, we got to back off because you're playing hockey, you got practices. At the academy, they do an extra hour of skill skates a day. So they got 1 hour with me in the weight room, then they got an hour skill skate. And then these kids go and practice with their own teams outside of that, right? So that's a big amount of volume. So yeah, I have to know the whole story of a kid to be able to kind of dance around what they have going on. But with that, like I said, there's some kids that to make, some kids will put on at 13, 14 years old, they can put on 20 pounds of muscle during a hockey season. I had plenty of kids do that this year. So, but you got to be smart, and then also, these are kids. So you got to take everything they say with a grain of salt. And what I always preach is this is one issue that comes a lot, when I'm talking to parents is the recovery model versus the frequency model. Okay. So the recovery model is, I played a game, I need to take a day off. The frequency model states, and especially for kids, the younger they are, the more frequently you do something, the more you're going to adapt. And that's what I always tell you. You're hyper adaptable right now. So the more you train, the stronger you're going to get, the less sore you're going to be. And at the end of the year, the more you're going to be happy with your results, right? Otherwise, we're going to take the day off and just stretch every time we got a game, within a week, then you're not going to make any progress for the whole year. And then, you only got 2 or 3 months over the summer to get your training in. And then if you don't train the next year, you're just going to lose whatever you built up over there. And like in the hockey, in football, like you just expect every kid to come back 20 pounds heavier and stronger over the summer. But in the hockey world, that concept really hasn't sunk in, so I get kids that come back from the summer. I'm like, you literally are exactly the same as when you left 3 months ago. Okay. So there's all levels of it, some of the kids are young. They just don't get it yet. So yeah, that's really the really the thing there is just the difference of what a hockey season entails, and then how do I, as a strength and conditioning coach, get as much progress as I possibly can without interfering with what's happening on the ice.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance, but I think like you mentioned, like just being in constant communication with everything and then kind of being abreast of everything that's going on, talking to the players and having an understanding of like where they're coming from and how they're feeling. Like once you kind of piece all those things together, you can put together like the best fit program for that situation and for that individual athlete. We talked about it before, like a little bit, like with the education and stuff. Like, when you're going about the process, because these athletes are very impressionable, like
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure, I know we'll talk about it too, like just kind of how you're training and how they see you kind of train, if that kind of makes a big impression. Before we get into that, talking about like the education side, how do you kind of practically go about talking to the players about, like, maybe you might have like nutritionists and some other avenues where you kind of stick within your realm, but how do you kind of discuss with them education and like the importance of training? How in depth do you kind of get? And you talked about like working with the parents. Like, do you have kind of some of these educational discussions separately from the athletes and the parents, like with the parents only, with the coaching staff and some of the other support staff? Like, how does that kind of process go about where you're making sure everybody understands, like, hey, this is what we're going to do in the weight room, so that a coach knows, like, when it comes to playtime, this is what they're going to do. This is what's important for your son or daughter, and this is what's important for you as an athlete kind of growing.
Yeah, I mean, really, what you're saying there, the biggest thing I got to get is the athlete to buy in, right? Because like these kids, if they want to hide upstairs in the locker room from me, they can do it. That's happened before. And so the things that I talk about to try to get the kids interested in lifting weights, because for me, I was a football player. I knew I had to lift weights. Luckily, I liked it. Some of these young kids, they don't like lifting weights, so you got to kind of convince them a bit. So the number one thing I do is I explain and just, once again, I'm a Poliquin guy. So power to weight ratio. So I'll get the whiteboard out and I'll explain to these kids, how do you skate faster? How do I get faster at skating? Because these kids will do the power skating lessons, or worse yet, one of those fake ice treadmills for hockey or whatever, things like that. And so what I explained to them, I get the whiteboard out and it's like, how fast you are, how explosive you are is directly tied to your power to weight ratio. And so I'll say, how does an Olympic sprinter run so fast? Because they have a 3-to-1 power to weight ratio. So you got like for example, Ben Johnson, that's a guy that was 200 pounds, but he could squat 600 pounds for 2 sets of 6. Now, ass to grass, right? And so that's why he's able to, if you want your car to go faster, you got to put more horsepower in it. Okay. You can practice driving it to get more accurate and more detailed and things like that, more controlled. But at the end of the day, we got to put more horsepower in the car. And if we want the kids to go faster on the ice, I got to put more horsepower in them. So what I do is I draw out, I'm like, okay, how much do you squat? How much do you trap bar deadlift? Okay, and here's your weight, and then here's our power to weight ratio. And I'll explain to them, the better this number gets, the faster you will be on the ice. Charles Poliquin used to say he could take somebody's front squat and then predict what their sprint time would be and, on the ice. Okay, so that's how tightly correlated this stuff is. And then the other end of it is the shoulder stuff for my younger guys. I'm like, almost half the guys in juniors have had some kind of shoulder surgery. So then I'll get out a picture of a rotator cuff. And so you see these little straps of bacon, your whole career is hanging by these little straps of muscle right here in your shoulder. Okay, because if those go out, then who knows where your career is going to go. So that's how I try to bring it to is, okay, how is this going to help me on the ice? Okay, am I going to skate faster? That's normally a big sell for them because there seems to be a lot of mystery about how to run and skate faster when this stuff has been figured out many, many years ago. But, the health and fitness field is, I thought things were going to get, more reality based as time went on. But, with the advent of social media and stuff like, oh my gosh, I mean, these kids know who Liver King is and Sam Sulek is, but they don't know who Charles Poliquin is or, or West Side Barbell. It's just everything's out of order, and that's one thing why I got more into my social media was I found out my 14-year-old nephew was a Liver King fan and he wasn't eating any carbs and couldn't figure out why he couldn't gain weight. So, okay, the only way Uncle Joe is going to be cool is to get on the internet and do more stuff. So that was actually a big motivation for me. But yeah, that's you got to make it relatable to the athletes. Some kids love the idea of working out and seeing themselves get bigger and stronger. And, if you can bench press a lot as a hockey player, that just tells me that your shoulders are stable and strong. But once again, these aren't football players. I'm not trying to create 250-pound monsters. My average size guy on my U18 hockey team is 175 pounds. Okay. Not a lot to ask. Average juniors player is 190. Average NHL player is 201 pounds. Okay. So these guys don't have to be gigantic. So it's a little bit different from footballers. Nobody needs to put on 50, 60 pounds where, football kids are eating, buckets of peanut butter and jelly and stuff like that to gain weight. Like these kids don't have to go through it. So I don't feel like I'm asking a ton, with the hockey guys, but yeah, you're to your point. I have to get buy-in. So I have to explain this stuff. And then, parents is a whole nother deal. So I definitely take time to explain it to them because everybody's trying to sell them everything. Okay. So it's like, and one thing I'll say to them is like, obviously I'm the coach of the school. I coach Brian Rolston's kids. We got Ryder Rolston's in the AHL for the Rockford Ice Hogs. Then his other son, Stone, is playing, just got home from BCHL. He was playing for the Chilliwack Chiefs. So I tell parents, I'm like, hey, Brian trusts me to train his school, his kids, and his, hockey program, Little Caesars program. So please just trust me, because there's just so much stuff. I mean, every time I hear about a parent spending a bunch of money on a hockey treadmill, I just, I want to help them. But there's just so much misinformation out there, especially when it comes to sports training or, training in general. It's kind of a jungle out there to find real information. So it's like, yeah, I have to sit down and talk to people, explain it, do little notes, do some little math equations for them, because the tough part about power to weight ratio is that it works against you 4-to-1. So if I'm going to gain 20 pounds in a year, I have to put 80 pounds of power into my body. So that means, 80 pounds on my trap bar deadlift, front squats, back squats, something in order to just maintain my speed. Right. But luckily, like I said, these guys don't have to gain massive amounts of weight. So I can focus more on strength and let the weight kind of follow as a secondary thing.
No, that's great. That's also good too. Advice for anybody that does work with football or doesn't work with football. Like that's why football is so strength based and so heavy in the weight room because of that. It's like there's monsters in the trenches. Those guys are getting so much bigger, but you don't necessarily have to have that absolute amount of strength. Like when you come to some of these other skill based sports like hockey and like, I mean, tennis or any of those ones, like where I mean, you're talking about collision and contact sports too. Like it's important to have kind of that body armor on you, but at some point there is a give where it's not necessarily to go above a certain amount. But yeah, there's so much information out there, so much misinformation. It's hard to kind of like sift through everything. And that was super interesting to hear because I didn't think like some of the kids at that age, like I knew they would kind of it would maybe like come across their minds, but I thought like parents more so because they're trying to do what's best for their kids and they're like going through and they're just randomly scrolling and they see something pop up and it like constantly is in there. It has a million views. So they're like, well, this seems viable, this seems reliable. And it's so hard for coaches that are doing like a good job like within their organization or within their kind of bubble or within their community to kind of fight with those things because I don't know if it's a cash grab. Anybody could sell a program online. Like
Yeah.
anybody can go through and do that stuff. I forget who told me this, but I can pull any idiot off the street and give them a whiteboard and a marker and have them put together exercises, whether it
Mhm.
makes sense, it's the right verbiage, it doesn't matter. And I can say, hey, the goal is to make them throw up. It's not that hard. I
Yeah.
I could do it. It's there's an art and a science to it to like make it match and make it perfect for that team and give them what they need, not just crush people like to infinity. And sifting through that information and trying to build buy-in not only with the coaches but like with the athletes, like those kids, and then the parents too. Like I want like if you I feel like if you got the kids, you hopefully have the parents sold. If you have the parents sold, like you don't necessarily have the kids,
Yeah.
but so I
Yeah.
don't know which one you put more emphasis into
Well,
in the beginning.
it just depends because sometimes you're right. There's a mismatch of motivation. Sometimes these parents, I mean, hockey's an expensive sport. Like, so if you're going to play travel hockey, like, I understand why my parents never even offered it to me. They said, here's a football helmet, go play. Because, like, the hockey, just the skates alone these days are, oh, man. And so, yeah, you definitely get that. And I have varying degrees of, effort that I get, and it's like, well, if you look back at any pro hockey player, like the guys that actually make it, they're doing everything they can. Like Yarmir Yager, I remember seeing an interview on him. He was doing 100 push-ups and 300 squats a day when he was 7. Okay, like that's a guy that wants it. That's a guy like. But then I got other kids, like I said, they'll hide from me on a given day because they're tired. I'm like, because the rule is you got to talk to me every day. You at least tell me what's going on. And I'm pretty reasonable. If you need to rest, I'll tell you to rest. But sometimes kids don't trust in that. So yeah, and that's every sport. Sometimes the parents want the kid to be a pro hockey player more than the kid does. Or they want to be, but they just don't like the amount of work that it takes. And believe me, hey, I tell them the world needs accountants too. Okay, not everybody has to be a pro athlete. You know what I'm saying? And so yeah, effort does definitely vary. And like I said, the kids that really want it, you'll see them. They got free time at the school. They're out on the ice. They're stick handling. They're practicing. Anytime they get. Kids. I got kids that stay in the weight room for an hour and a half every day because they're doing their mobility and they're stretching and all that stuff. Other kids just their whole goal is to get down there and get out as fast as possible, with as little work, so yeah, definitely varying degrees of motivation. As a coach, you can only do so much.
Right. Yeah, you can lead them to the water, but you want them to kind of figure it out on their own and you want
Yeah.
them to be eventually like intrinsically motivated to do it. And I mean, with a sport like travel hockey, like I didn't play travel hockey. Like when we moved back to North Carolina, it was roller hockey because
Yeah.
my mom was not going to drive me and my two brothers to the nearest rink, which was like an hour and a half away. And there's no way, like we got lucky when we moved back, there was a hockey team like for our high school, and now we can play ice hockey for the first time. But it's still like we're going to play it against sports to like see what we can kind of mismatch together. I definitely my skates did not fit. I know for sure. But I mean
Yeah.
it was all that was there. So I could see how it's a weird kind of like tug of war between like early specialization, like all these things going on, like different training, like parents kind of invested more than athletes. They invested money into it. The players are like, oh man, I I've seen at the college level where especially like some of my wrestlers and like some of those sports like that are like kind of like culture driven and like passed down like from parents,
Mhm.
where kids were like looking at me and they just get pinned and they're like, I don't want to fucking do this, man.
Yeah,
And
it's not for
and
everybody.
and they're like dad is in the crowd, like right up on the fence, just like get back in there, get in there. And I was like, oh my God, like that's you don't want that. You want the kids to like kind of live their own life. You want to help them and like push them in the right direction and like not have them quit and like do some hard things. But at the end of the day, like you're going to get to a point in your career where it's like it's ultimately your decision. And if you're always waiting for people behind you to be like, hey, you got this, like you don't got it. It's not going
Yeah,
to happen.
yeah. You can be a mathlete. You don't have to be an athlete.
Hey, so let's kind of go back a little bit, like from your career and like your training and everything. Like we talked about a lot of strongman, like
Mhm.
that's kind of your passion and what you've been doing for a long time. Like working with these athletes, are there any opportunities to kind of put in some strongman movements, strongman-esque kind of things? Like, and if you do, like what's kind of your first approach to implementing those, or like in what manner do you kind of use and like what kind of equipment do you use when it comes down to it?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think I already said this. I'm working on a book right now, Strongman for Athletes, where I'm going to get, really in depth with this. So, like, my advice to coaches, especially if you're not already a strongman, the things that you can immediately implement is number one, any kind of sled dragging, okay, forward, backward, sideways, any kind of sled. That's your first. Because one thing, just, about my strength and conditioning kind of views in general is like, there's always been an issue about what happens in the weight room. Is that really transferring over to the field, right? And it's like, I don't, is there a correlation? Is getting better at this in the weight room going to get you better out there? And I feel that the strongman movements, because number one, when you're typical weight room movements, you don't move your feet. But in every athletic endeavor, you move your feet, right? So moving weight through a three-dimensional space, I think, is good for any athlete. So the easiest way, especially if you're a coach that doesn't have a lot of strongman background, do sled pushes, pulls. Anyway, that's your first one you want to implement. Second, the one that has the most carryover to athletes, especially my hockey players, because they have a lot of asymmetries, farmers walks. Obviously, these kids are not doing them super heavy, but I'm getting them to carry a load with good posture. Remember, these are hockey players. They're spending all their time hunched over with one shoulder hiked up and, all the time. So that's a great movement that I can do. That's a little bit of conditioning element. Grip training is very important for hockey players to hold on to the stick. And then also that's going to develop some core strength. All right. So those are the first two. If I'm a coach and I want to start implementing strongman, those are the first two kind of baby steps to it. Now, what I don't do is you don't see my hockey players, doing Atlas stones or anything like that. Okay. So there are limitations to it. And that's what I'll tell any coach is like the worst case scenario is like if you're a CrossFit person and you love CrossFit and then you try to train all your clients like they're CrossFit. Okay. If that's not their goal. And that's just, our pre as human beings, we tend to gravitate to what we know, and we think that okay, this worked for me. I like this, so therefore it's going to work for everybody else. So yeah, with every sport, there are definitely strongman implements and exercises that can benefit it. But certain sports like hockey, there's not a ton. Like if I was going to add something, maybe I would add yoke walks, but they're pretty similar to farmers. They're just harder equipment wise to set up, things like that. So those are the biggest things is to get that. But now when you go to football, now we have a lot more exercises that are going to apply to football than let's say hockey. Okay. And once again, have limited time and stuff like that. But the motivational stuff definitely helps with the strongman. And I'm just, shocked that, just in general in the collegiate world, especially the football world, there's not much strongman going on. And then when you do see it, it's typically not loaded correctly. Like I was at a facility where, there's a 330-pound NFL lineman and he's got, 135 just on one side doing farmers walks. And I'm like, that's not even, that's a warm-up weight, for a 330-pound guy, even if he's doing it on balance. All right. It's just, if you don't do it, then you don't understand the loading, and so that's where it is, and that's, like I said, I'm going to go, super in depth in that in my book that I'm going to write this, or I'm finishing up this summer anyway. And but yeah, there are definitely some movements that I think are big missing links in transferring, our strength in the weight room to our strength on the field. But there's a lot of strongman movements that the risk reward ratio is just not worth it. So some things that look cool, like a tire flip, looks super cool. It's actually a great conditioning. But if I got a hockey player that tears a bicep, then, I'm just a crappy coach. Okay. And that's my fault for just not understanding, that wasn't appropriate for that athlete. Right. And so, yeah, that's something I'm super passionate about is, getting more strongman lifts into the training of athletes, because I really feel that that's a missing link. But once again, you got to be reasonable, and you got to understand the limitations of, the exercise and who you're working with. And like I said, just because it's something that I love doesn't mean that I should train all my hockey players in a strongman manner, right? There's just a few things. And the analogy that I always use for training is like, I love mixed martial arts, right? In mixed martial arts, nobody learns just boxing or just jujitsu or just, and so the analogy I use is like the version of martial arts in our sports is like strongman, powerlifting, Highland Games, Olympic weightlifting, things like, so those are the different disciplines, let's say, that you need to pull from to put together a program for an athlete. Okay, you should have some familiarity with all those things, but in no case would I ever train a hockey player like a power lifter exclusively. There's only some certain things that I pick and choose from each of those things to put it together. And that's where I think, as a coach, if you don't have one passion of, doing strongman or whatever, go do Olympic lifting, do a bodybuilding show, do a powerlifting contest, do a Highland. You're going to learn so much that's going to transfer, and it's going to widen your perspective so much that you might find some things that are good for athletes in there. And as a coach, the more experience you have, the more you can kind of filter those things down to what's going to be effective for, a given athlete.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, especially if, like you said, if you don't have like one thing that kind of drives your passion. I mean, even if you do, like it doesn't hurt to go out and try something different. Even you don't have to compete in it, but give it the same as you would try another program, and kind of give it a enough amount of time that you get through the initial stage, you kind of get through the awkward phase, like you learn it a little bit, you kind of get to an intermediate phase, and like maybe you're done with it after that point, but you're able to kind of take some of the benefits from it, or maybe it solidifies what your rationale was before. Like maybe hey, this is too advanced, or I can't put this in my program, or I have to tweak this a lot. It's not really worth it. Like the same with some of those strongman movements. I was the same way. Like I love adding those movements and incorporating them, but the way that I do it with my baseball players is different than I do with my beach volleyball players, which is way different than I did with my wrestlers. Like
Yeah,
I could
yeah,
do anything with them
yeah.
for that stuff because
Kind of
it fits the
sandbags, yeah,
sport.
fun stuff, right?
Oh yeah, I mean they knew what it was. Like one of their like this was coaches, but one of their accountability reminders. Mine was if you come in a minute late, like you have to put your body weight on a sled and you have to push it down and back because you're dead weight to the team.
I
And
love that.
it
I
went
like
up
that.
to it went up to 10 minutes, but then as
Yeah.
soon as it was 10 minutes and 1 second, all right, you grab a quarter of your body weight in dumbbells and you're going farmers walking through the stadium, hit every single stair. And those guys were gone for 2 hours. I was like, oh my God, this is I'm like, well, I mean, I think you learned the lesson, right? But yeah, there's plenty of ways you can incorporate those things, but there are risk reward to any single movement. And as a coach, the more you kind of are in tune with the different methods that you can kind of use, the different programming, the different tools, the different exercises and movement patterns, like the more you can kind of fit what works well for not just your sport, but like your team, or like the facility and the equipment you have access to, or the time you're allotted. Because that's what I feel like when I talk to some of the younger coaches, like, well, how do you kind of come up with a program so quickly or on the spot? I was like, well, it's not perfect, but I can do it fast because I know the context. I like know the set and setting. I know what we're doing. I know the flow of the room. I know what they need. I know what they kind of don't need. And yeah, you can refine it more as you go. But once you have more tools, it's easier to kind of come up with something quicker because you can hit the big rocks faster because you have more to pull from.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, as a coach, like if you're really interested in coaching, get out there and do as many different things as you can. Because one question I get all the time is, for people looking at starting strongman, they say, okay, I want to start strongman. What should I do? They're really confused because the first thing I'll say is start Olympic lifting. Okay, because in strongman, like everybody thinks powerlifting is the best gateway into strongman, but there's no overhead in powerlifting, right? And so that's guys that can be 20 to 40% of your score because sometimes there's two pressing events. So if you're a bad overhead presser, you're going to lose 40% of the points. Okay, you're probably not going to win, right? And so, and then you also in powerlifting, as it's misnamed, you don't use momentum. And so Olympic lifting teaches you to like do your cleans, use momentum, push pressing to get overhead, stuff like that. So with any sport necessarily, there's always something else you can do to correlate. So like if I had two twin brothers, one's a power lifter, one's an Olympic lifter, and I get to pick one to teach strongman to, I'm taking the Olympic lifter every time.
Yeah, I think that conditioning element and the power element that comes from different sports really like that was the only reason that kind of helped me in strongman because I don't have like powerlifting like kind of that static
Yeah,
like
the
no
slow.
momentum strength. I don't have that compared to like I could be twitchier and more powerful, at least like kind of grind out a really shitty medley. Like I can
Mhm.
do that a lot better than deadlift ladder because as soon as I see that on it, I'm like, damn it, this is gonna be a rough show.
Trust me, we all avoid certain shows based on
that
that.
that that's definitely the one. Hey, so with that in mind too, like when you're kind of looking at competitions, like I don't know how far out you're projecting, like what you're kind of gonna do next. But how was your training kind of shift like over the course of like specifically like your strongman career? I know it's been a little bit more sporadic, like when you're able to do competitions. But how is like your coaching and kind of maybe the people and like the clientele and athletes you're working with maybe shifted your gears and shifted your thought process when it comes back to your own training?
Well, one thing I'm 40 now. So one thing I wasn't ready for was getting old. Okay. So the one thing I'll tell you, the older you get, the the distance between getting stronger and getting injured gets shorter and shorter. Okay. Like my training partners even laugh at me. Like, hey, you got this much give before you get hurt sometimes. Okay. So that's the biggest thing is that when I was younger, I could tolerate a lot more volume. I could be less organized about my training. If I wanted to do extra this and that, I didn't care. Now that I'm older, as I get towards 40, I just have to be more careful with my planning and not doing extra thing on monitoring my volume for the week. And when I feel an injury start coming on, but then again, I cannot convince my training partners that there's a difference between 21 and 40. Okay. You have to actually go through it to understand that happens. They don't think that that's a thing. So sometimes I got to be a little bit careful, but yeah, that's been the biggest thing, going from, I've been doing strongman for over 15 years yeah, I used to be able to stay out all night, wake up on 2 hours of sleep, go to training and kick ass, and then I was fine. But now everything's got to be lined up, and if I don't, then I'm gonna pay for it. So that's like as time goes on, that's what you learn is that just because that works for a 21-year-old, that's not going to work for you. There's a big difference between 20, 30, and 40, as you know, as you go through your training career. But you can only really understand what that means when you live through it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Father Time is undefeated, and it's I remember some of those days like going to train with Andy, and I'm like, well, I know I had a rough night the night before, and I know tomorrow's going to be worse. But then, as I got older, and then even as watched some of like the other some of the pro strongman like have their career and like how they've changed and how they've like really dialed in their training. It's like, oh, I'm deadlifting once every 2 weeks. Like I can't handle that anymore. Like you, it's such a hard concept because like you have to find the balance between like really loving training,
Mhm.
loving success and being competitive and knowing like when to dial back based off of what your training looks like because it's not the same as it was before. And I've talked to guys that have had like Highland Games careers that were professional or like bigger guys, and then they've cut down to like lightweight or they're changed sports, have had like hard surgeries and stuff like that. And they're like, I've come to terms with it. Like I'll never hit a PR again. Or like but
Yeah.
that's one thing to think about. But and when you're getting older, that might not be the case necessarily, but the way you have to kind of come to term with like I can't train the way that I was before if I still want to be making progress and be successful. And that doesn't mean I'm not going to hit a PR. That doesn't mean I'm going to be successful, not be successful on the platform or like at a competition or on the ice or whatever it is. But I need to be humble enough to accept that this isn't soft. This isn't like being weak. This isn't like making an excuse. Like this is the way that I have to do
Yeah.
it in order to be successful. And that's again, that's a, we talked about. It's a fine line to kind of walk, but
Mhm.
it comes with experience and it comes with like understanding yourself and like how you respond to training, how your training has been, and like what you can kind of relate back to after a 15-year career.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, you're definitely right there. It's definitely my volume is lower. My, attempts over 90% are much fewer than they used to be. Like that was a good point about the deadlift, because especially as you get older, that one, hey, I hit a deadlift PR, but I tweaked my back, so now I can't train deadlifts for 6 weeks. That's over the course of a year, you're not going to make any progress like that. So you got to you got to take your wins when you can. Your PR, like, and one thing I'll say, the older you get, the more important rep PRs are. Okay, right now, like if I did 275 for 4 last week and I do it for 5, that's as good as a max to me. And I just keep all those numbers, and that's a big thing for the older guys. I definitely say that is like, don't be pushing your maxes all the time. Okay. Do your reps, stay 80, 85%, and then max at the contest. As if, Zadrunas Zavickas, he once gave the best advice I ever heard. He pressed a 515 log at a contest and barely even had to, push press it. Right. And then afterwards, the announcer goes, well, what have you done in the gym? If you did 515 so easy here, you've obviously done more in the gym. And he just looks at the guy. And sometimes when you're second language, you can communicate a little bit better than the first one. He goes, no max in gym, max at contest. Okay. And that's the most brilliant advice I've ever heard for an older competitor. Okay.
That's perfect. I mean, I do that a lot with my athletes when it comes to like Olympic lifting. And I found that out like from some of my mentors. Like when you get up above 90%, like, and this goes well with like other stuff too, but Olympic lifting is so technical and most of the athletes I'm going to get like aren't really proficient at it or they haven't done it before. Maybe they haven't done it the way I'm asking them to do it. It's like we don't go above 90% like hardly ever because as soon as you get to that point, like everything is different. The bar is moving slower, and I've been preaching like speed on the bar, hitting your positions, all this stuff. Like, what's the point of getting to that where they're just going to fail, 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 and then they're going to pull something completely starfish ugly out, maybe break their ankle, or break their wrist,
Yes. Yeah.
just for a number. Like when everything that we're doing in there is training so that they're in a better position to be successful, like on the field or on the sand, on the ice, whatever it is.
Yeah, it takes discipline because I'm numbers based. I'm sure you're numbers based when you train, and to be able to back off from that a little bit. And like you said, maybe you don't hit a PR this year. That's kind of mentally hard to do, but maybe you improve on some other things and you don't get hurt. So you're actually ahead of where you would be if you pushed it. I would rather have 3 beautiful attempts at something at 90% where I hit it perfectly than hit a new PR for one rep. I think in the long term, that's going to carry you a lot farther, especially the older you get. You need to back off and get heavy but perfect reps. Okay, and that was another Russian training system, or if you're in Olympic weightlifting, A.S. Prilipin's chart, which was the basis for Westside Barbell. He gives you all the percentages and how many reps you should do in the sets for Olympic weightlifting right there. And that's, like I said, I'm not a big fan of trying to reinvent the wheel. I mean, A.S. Prilipin took thousands and thousands of weightlifters' training logs and condensed them down into that beautiful little chart. And like then for most people don't know, that's the whole basis of the West Side barbell system was those percentages and things like that. And that's, and on that chart, it won't tell you to go 100% of the time. Okay. It'll save you a little bit of reading there. But yeah, that you're absolutely right. The older you get, the more perfect but heavy practice should be and the younger you are, then, like my training partners, they can go to failure. They, stay at the gym after I leave and do biceps and triceps and every other thing. You know what I'm saying? But I have to be a little bit more careful about my volume.
Yeah, don't need to be a weight room warrior. Like you can wait till competition day. No one wins a competition like in their garage or at the training facility. You can definitely lose one there though for sure and put yourself in a terrible position. So
Yeah. Don't be trying to one up people on Instagram. Okay. The contest matters. If you do more than
that's the worst place to do it.
yeah, you win your prize of nothing.
Yeah, congratulations. Hey, Joe. So like any good training session, we end the show with the finisher. So I got 4 quarters, 4 questions.
Yeah.
And just like a good old school strongman day, we got one question for overtime just to finish it off. So you can go as fast as you want with these rapid fire, or you could take your time on any, but you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, first one I got for you. Biggest influence in the strength and conditioning, like coaching profession, and favorite strength athlete or strongman.
Yeah, so definitely, like I'd already mentioned this before, Charles Poliquin was kind of my introduction to strength training and things like that. But as far as favorite athlete, I'm sure you, like I, grew up watching the reruns of World's Strongest Man on ESPN. So my number one guy of all time is Bill Kazmaier. I actually got to meet him once. It was pretty pretty awesome. He actually thought I was somebody else that had talked to him earlier, and he came sprinting at me. We were at nationals. And he just sprinted across the whole thing and said, "Hey, guy, remember when you showed me this on your phone?" And I was like this, and my two buddies that were with me split because they thought he was mad at me. But yeah, that guy, he's an amazing guy. He's got a head the size of a pumpkin too. Yeah, he's just a massive individual. When you walk up to him, you shake. You don't shake his hand, you shake 2 of his fingers. Okay. Like he is just, he's a different breed of human being, but man, that's who really that's what really made me want to be a strong man when I was younger.
Yeah, I met him one time at a conference, and like you said, yeah, he's got a pumpkin of a head. Just his hand, they're mitts, they're
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah, the guy he didn't even use a microphone to address a crowd of 180 people. They tried to hand him the mic. He goes, "I don't need that." And he just spoke and projected
That's like
yeah.
that's like that old strongman-esque. Like I feel like those old circus tricks where guys could actually blow up the hot bags.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I remember like the warnings of those. You're like, you can't do those. It'll like blow back and blow out your
Yeah.
lungs. I was like, these guys are doing it. This is crazy.
Yeah, you can blow back and explode your own lungs there.
That's wild. Hey, so when you're not coaching, you're not competing or training, like what are some of your hobbies like outside of the weight room?
Oh, well, this is kind of my only hobby and interest. But, but outside of that, now that I'm older, I'm trying to do more physical activity. I'm trying to walk, run, bike, do all that stuff. But really, if I'm not lifting weights, I'm not in the weight room, and I'm not reading about lifting weights, I'm probably sleeping.
That's good. There you go. That's a good hobby to have.
Yeah, it's always ever been. But that's why, I'm lucky to be able to do this kind of full time because it's the only thing I've ever really been interested in.
That's perfect. Hey, so then this one might be a little bit harder to kind of answer. I know you've been in different parts of health and fitness and coaching, but if you weren't doing like strength conditioning, what do you think you would be doing as a profession instead?
Well, probably be doing sales because, as a personal trainer, what you are is a salesman. Okay. So you have to sell training if you want to pay your rent. And so I did that. I learned that from the training business and also the pharmaceutical sales, learned sales. But yeah, man, that's not something I ever thought about. Football was A, strength conditioning was B. I don't know if I ever had a C. I was never great at math, so I don't know.
Yeah, keep doing what you're doing. Don't even worry about C.
Yeah,
You'll be fine.
I think it's too late now. Anyway.
Hey, so either getting ready for a competition or just kind of training, like if you're setting up an ideal training day for yourself, like what is playing through the speakers? Like what's the go-to music? And then session is done, what does the best post-training meal look like?
Oh, well, when it comes to music, I would definitely say, I don't know, do you know Clutch?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So me and one of my training partners really love them. The older one, the younger kids hate it. So I do Clutch, but I grew up on Metallica, Pantera, Megadeth, all those heavy metal bands. That's what I grew up listening to and training to when I was a kid. But like some of the hardcore music these days, I can't get into. I don't know if you heard some of this stuff. Like in my gym, they play this music where I can't even understand what the guy's saying. Doesn't get me hyped up. I need to hear some articulated, words in order for me to get excited. But yeah, I keep it old school with the heavy metal.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
then
Well,
the ideal meal after
yeah.
I work out. Yeah, I think the older you get, the less you kind of get into. If I don't have a protein shake immediately after I work out, I'm gonna lose all my gains and I'm gonna miss the anabolic window and all that junk that they had to advertise to us as a kid. There's some truth to that. Obviously, I get into the physiology. But I would rather just have some steak and potatoes to be done with it. I got one of those flat top grills, throw a couple steaks on there, some hash browns or some potatoes. Boom. That's how I do it. I keep it pretty simple these days. After because I was a competitive bodybuilder and I was so used to watching everything I ate every second of the day. Once I got into strongman, I mean, I get enough protein, I get enough calories, but I don't, I do not like getting into the nitty gritty of it. That's kind of why I'll really refer people out for if they want a specific diet or things like that, because I just like to keep it simple now in my old age. you know?
Steak and potatoes are never bad, so that's
Yeah,
perfect.
yeah, that's never gotten old.
Hey, so last one I got for you
Yeah.
for overtime, like either favorite under the bar, like competition or training memory, or favorite coaching memory of yours, or first one that comes to mind.
Oh man, I mean, really, my original thing when I first started was getting kids Division I scholarships was like my biggest thing, and like going to a graduation party of a kid that I helped get a D1 scholarship at, that was always the top to me to my coaching career. And now today, with my hockey players, if I get a kid that moves on to juniors and gets and fits in and actually gets along, that's the biggest thing that makes me happy. But in my coaching career, the most proud moment I've ever had was my oldest nephew, he's 18 now, but he kind of quit lifting weights and playing sports by the time he was 10 and 15. And then all of a sudden, midway through his sophomore year, all of a sudden he goes, "Hey, Uncle Joe, I want to start lifting weights." And so, starting at halfway through his sophomore year, by the end of his senior year at the state powerlifting championships, he went from a zero deadlift to 500 and got top 10 in the state. That is absolutely my proudest moment as a coach. Because I don't have kids, but I've got a bunch of nephews, and so as a strength coach, you got young family members like, oh, I can't wait till you're old enough to train. I can't wait. I'd take them out in the front yard at Easter and set up cones and do all that stuff when they were little, and now they're finally getting to the age where they can actually train and stuff like that. But yeah, that's my oldest nephew Stevie. That was still to this day top moment of my coaching career.
That's awesome. It's even cooler too, like when it's a family member and it's so personal and it's something he's never gonna forget too. And it's cool, like with that's such a pivotal age, like in that, like who you're working with, and like even like when you're getting towards high school, like we said, if you're not intrinsically motivated to do it, it's hard to kind of pressure kids to like stay involved in a sport or stay involved in lifting. You kind of have to have them come back on their own. So for him to come back and like
Uh,
realize he missed it and kind of want like his uncle's advice, like that's a pretty special moment. And for him to have like success like that and do so well, that's even sweeter.
oh yeah, I fell out of my chair. I was so happy when that happened, man.
That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey, so Joe, for anybody that's got any questions for you, that want to follow along and then they want to see, make sure they can keep up to date with you, like especially when you finally release the book that you're working on too. Where can they get a hold of you? Where can they follow you?
Yeah, so I don't know if we mentioned this. I already do have one book out, Becoming a Champion Strongman. That's available through firstattachment.com. And then kind of moving forward here, like I said, I'm going to do the Strongman for Athletes book. I'm also working on in-season, off-season for hockey players. And then outside of that, you know, at Little Caesars, we're currently implementing a GPS system. I don't know if you've worked with any of those. We've got the guys from Catapult coming out. We've been working on that. And yeah, that's really what's going to keep me busy for the summer here. Did I answer that question right?
Yeah, you're good. Hey, so we'll tag everything on there.
Oh, yeah, where to follow me. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Got distracted there.
You remember what it is?
Yeah, so just follow me, Joe Sheffield Strongman on Instagram. That's where I do all my posting, all my info usually goes through there. And then also I think I'll put up my email address. So if anybody wants to contact me for private coaching, online coaching, questions, anything like that, the easiest way to get a hold of me is going to be my Instagram. My athletes are making fun of me because I don't have a TikTok or a YouTube. So I'm going to try to get those going this summer when I got a little bit more time. I get a lot of with the technology and stuff like that. But yeah, so anybody that wants to follow me, the best place would be my Instagram. That's where I put most of my information.
Awesome. Hey, like I said, I really appreciate you coming on today. It was good to chat with you. Like, I love talking strongman and athletics too, and being able to kind of merge the two together. Like, it's got me fired up. I need to look for a competition soon. So, hey, this has been fun. I appreciate you coming on today, Joe.
Yeah, thanks a lot, man. This was great. I think we almost did about 2 hours here, so it's kind of flew by. But like I said, this is my only hobby or interest, so it's really the only thing I talk about anyway. So it's pretty natural for me to go over everything.
That's perfect. No, well, I'm cool with it too. We'll definitely have to keep in touch, and we'll keep it going off air. We'll save it for another time for everybody else. But like I said, thanks again for coming on and sharing with the audience today, man. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you so much, man. Appreciate it.
That's it for this episode of The Strength Game. Thank you again to this week's guest and to our sponsors. Be sure to connect and keep up with our guests at the links in the description below. Remember to subscribe to us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast provider to stay up to date on all future episodes. Also, check us out on YouTube and CoachO'Brien.com, where you can find all the video versions of these episodes, as well as show notes, episode schedule, and much more. Comments, ratings, and reviews are always welcome and appreciated. Thanks again for tuning in, and be sure to join us next week for another great episode of The Strength Game.